I never imagined I would live to see the day when my own son would look at me like a stranger, a look that used to be filled with love, now heavy with silence. When my daughter-in-law told me to stay away, I didn't argue, I didn't shout. I didn't even ask why. I just stood there, with my hands trembling, my heart beating slowly like the ticking of an old clock. I had spent a lifetime building a home for my family, but at that moment, it no longer felt like my home. I remember the warmth of this house when it was first built, the laughter that filled the rooms, the smell of fresh bread in the kitchen, the sound of my son's little feet running down the hallway. But things change, people change, and sometimes love fades quietly, not because it dies, but because it gets pushed aside. I used to think family bonds were unbreakable. I was wrong. This is my story. Not of anger, not of revenge, but of love, disappointment, and the quiet ache of a mother's heart. It begins on an ordinary morning. A morning that felt like any other. But looking back now, I realize it was the beginning of everything changing. I was born and raised in a small town where family was everything. We grew up close to each other, brothers, sisters, cousins, all living just a few doors away. People knew one another by name. When someone was in trouble, the whole neighborhood showed up. When I married my husband, it wasn't a grand wedding. We didn't have much, but we had love. And we had dreams. We built our house little by little, a few bricks each month, every wall, every corner, every window had a story. I still remember the day we brought our son home for the first time. He was so small. I held him in my arms like he was the most precious thing in the world. Because he was. He had these big, curious eyes that would follow every little movement I made. My husband and I promised each other we would give him the best life we could. We worked hard. He took double shifts. I started sewing clothes at home. We saved every little bit we could. Our house was always full of noise back then. My son's laughter echoed through the rooms. He loved to run into the kitchen, tug at my sari and ask, "Ma, what's for dinner?" And I'd smile and say, "Your favorite? Rice and lentils, and maybe a sweet if you finish everything." He would clap his little hands, and my heart would swell with warmth. Years passed. He grew taller, stronger, and smarter. Every time he achieved something, first prize in school, first cricket match, first job, my heart felt bigger than the world. I always believed he would never leave me behind. When my husband passed away, my world shook. It felt like the ground beneath my feet had disappeared. But my son was there. He hugged me so tightly the day of the funeral and whispered, "Ma, I'll take care of you. Always." Those words became my anchor. I believed him. I trusted him. I loved him more than I loved myself. It was a few years later that he brought her home. Her smile was soft, and her voice was gentle. She looked like the kind of girl who would bring warmth to our house. And for a while, she did. She would sit with me in the kitchen and help me chop vegetables. She would ask me for recipes, and I would share little secrets, like how to make soft, fluffy bread or perfect tea. I remember telling my sister on the phone, "She's a good girl. I think she'll take care of him." Their wedding was simple but beautiful. The house was filled with music and laughter again. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt a piece of joy return to my chest. She moved in with us after the wedding, as was our family tradition. I was happy. I had always dreamed of having a daughter, someone to talk to share things with, to laugh with in the kitchen. And for some time, it truly felt like a dream come true. She would bring me tea in the afternoons. We would talk about everything, clothes, food, sometimes even about my son when he wasn't home. I thought we were close. But slowly, little things started to change. At first, it was small. So small, I almost ignored it. She started spending more time upstairs in their room. She stopped coming to the kitchen as often. She smiled less when I entered the room. I thought maybe she was just tired. Marriage brings new adjustments. I didn't want to burden her, but one night, I overheard something. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was walking past their door when I heard her voice. Sharp, quiet but cold. She said, "Why does she have to live here forever?" I froze. I held my breath so tight it hurt, and then I heard my son's voice, softer, uncertain. "She's my mother. This is her house." Her reply was quiet but firm. "Yes, but it should be our house now." I walked back to my room silently. I didn't cry that night, but something inside me shifted. It was the first time I felt like a guest in my own home. The days after that were quiet. Too quiet. She stopped making small talk. Meals felt colder. I tried to make things easier. I stopped sitting in the living room in the evenings, so they could have their space. I stopped asking her to help in the kitchen. I even started keeping to my room more often. I told myself, she's young. She needs time. She'll come around, but she never did. My son tried to keep things normal. I could tell. He would ask about my day, bring me little things from the market, sit with me for tea. But even in those moments, I saw something different in his eyes, like he was carrying a weight between us, and I knew exactly where that weight was coming from. Started cooking less, stopped buying flowers for the table. I kept my television volume low, so I wouldn't disturb anyone. I told myself this was my way of giving them space, that I was doing what any mother would do for her son's happiness. But deep down, it hurt. I missed the laughter, the sound of shared meals, the warmth of a house that felt alive. Now, it felt like walking on eggshells in my own home. Sometimes, late at night, I would whisper to myself, he promised me. He said he'd always take care of me. I held on to that promise like a fragile thread, but I didn't know how much longer it could hold, because love, when stretched too thin between people, can sometimes break silently, without a sound. The change didn't happen overnight. It was slow, quiet, like water seeping through the cracks in a wall. You don't notice it at first, but one day you look around, and everything feels different. The house that once echoed with laughter had grown silent. Even the little sounds, the kettle whistling, the wooden floor creaking, started to feel louder because there was no laughter to soften them anymore. I started noticing the small things. First, a closed door, a lowered voice when I entered a room, the way conversations would stop. When I walked in, one afternoon, I made tea for everyone like I always did. For years it was our routine. I'd make a pot of ginger tea around 4, and the three of us would sit together for a few minutes, even if it was just to talk about the day. But that day, when I placed the cups on the table, she looked at them and said, almost under her breath, "We usually have coffee now." I paused for a second. She didn't say it to me directly, more like to herself. But my son looked at me, then at her, and I could see the discomfort in his eyes. I quietly took the extra cup back to the kitchen. I didn't say anything, but something inside me felt a little colder. She began redecorating the house, slowly, but piece by piece. The curtains I had chosen with my husband replaced, the old tablecloth with embroidered flowers I had stitched years ago, gone. The family photo frames I used to polish every week moved into a corner. She said, "I just want to make it feel more like home." But for me, it already was home. Every curtain, every plate, every little mark on the wall had a story, and one by one, those stories were being erased. I didn't fight her. I told myself, she's young. It's her time now. Let her have it. But the truth was, every little change felt like a quiet reminder that I didn't belong in my own house anymore. One evening, I overheard another conversation. I wasn't trying to listen. But when love turns to distance, even whispers sound like thunder. She said to my son, "I can't live like this forever. I need space. I need us." And then, silence. My son said nothing for a long time. Then finally, he whispered, "She's my mother. I can't just push her out." Her reply was soft, but it broke me more than any scream could. "She's your mother, yes, but she's not mine." I closed my door gently and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands trembled. I felt small, smaller than I had ever felt in my life. I wasn't a mother in that moment. I was just in the way. We always celebrated the big holidays together. Even after my husband died, I kept the traditions alive. I cooked his favorite sweets, lit candles around the house, and made sure the family felt whole. This year, it felt different. She planned everything, invited her friends, decorated in her own way. I offered to help, but she smiled politely and said, "It's okay, Ma. We've got it handled." I wasn't part of we anymore. I stayed mostly in my room that evening. I could hear the laughter from outside, loud and joyful, but none of it reached my door. Later that night, I came out quietly to get a glass of water. I passed the living room. Everyone was sitting together, laughing, eating, taking pictures. No one noticed me, and in that moment I realized I wasn't the heart of the family anymore. I was just a shadow on the edge of the room. I tried to talk to her. I really did. I asked if I had done something wrong. She smiled that kind of smile that isn't real and said, "Oh no, Ma. It's just, you're a little old-fashioned." She said it gently, not to hurt me. But it did. I walked away before she could see my eyes filling with tears. Later that week, I heard her telling someone on the phone, "She's nice, but she doesn't understand our way of living. It's tiring sometimes. Tiring. The woman who raised the man she married. The woman who built this house with her own hands. I had become tiring." My son began to change too. He wasn't unkind. He didn't yell or push me away, but he grew quieter with me. He spent more evenings upstairs with her. Dinner time, which used to be our time, became their time. I often ate alone in the kitchen now, listening to the faint sounds of their laughter from the upper floor. Sometimes he would come down and say, "Ma, why aren't you joining us?" I'd smile and say, "You two eat together. I'll have mine later." I lied, not because I didn't want to be with them, but because I didn't want to feel like an unwanted guest at my own table. One morning, she suggested something. She said, "Ma, wouldn't it be nice if you had your own little space? Maybe closer to the temple, somewhere peaceful." She said it like it was a sweet idea, but I knew what it really meant. I smiled faintly and said, "This house is my peaceful place." She didn't argue. She just looked at me with that polite, distant smile that said everything she didn't want to say out loud. From that day, I began packing little pieces of myself away. My old books went into a box. My late husband's chair was moved to the corner. Even my favorite teapot disappeared into a cupboard. I wasn't leaving. But slowly, I was being erased. One evening, after washing the dishes, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman staring back at me looked tired, not just from age, but from holding on too tightly. My hair had turned more gray in the past year, my hands were thinner, and my eyes. They didn't shine the way they used to, I whispered to myself. When did I become a stranger in my own life? Words that stayed in my chest. I wanted to tell my son everything I felt, how I missed him, how I felt pushed aside, how the house didn't feel like home anymore. But every time I looked at his face, the boy I had raised, the man who once promised to take care of me, I couldn't do it, because if he chose not to see it himself, then saying it out loud would only make me the problem. So I stayed silent. When love turns quiet, some nights I still heard their whispers, not cruel, not loud, just quiet conversations about plans, dreams, futures that didn't seem to include me anymore. I would close my eyes and press my hand against my chest, feeling the slow beat of my heart. This house was supposed to be my safe place, my forever place, but it was slowly becoming a memory while I was still living in it. One night that changed everything. It was a Sunday night. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day of pretending everything was fine. But their voices woke me up. They were arguing. She said, "I can't do this anymore. She's always here. I need space." My son's voice was quiet. "She's my mother. She's always your mother." "But what about me?" she said, her voice cracking. "I can't build a life where I feel like a visitor in my own home." Silence. Long, heavy silence. And then, I heard the words I never thought I'd hear him say. Maybe we should think about her living somewhere else. I froze. For years I had feared this moment in the corners of my mind, but hearing it in his voice broke something inside me that can never be fixed. I pressed my palm against my mouth, trying not to make a sound. My chest felt tight, like someone was holding my heart in their fist. I didn't cry loud. There was no scream, no pleading. I just sat on the edge of my bed with tears rolling down my face silently. I had given him everything. My youth, my sleepless nights, my prayers, my life, and now my son was choosing a life where I didn't fit anymore. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and looked at the ceiling. The same ceiling my husband and I had built together. For the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a house I was renting with my memories. I remember that morning so vividly. The sun was shining, but the house felt cold. It was the kind of cold that doesn't come from the weather. It comes from silence. From distance, I had prepared breakfast like I always did. Paratha, boiled eggs, and a little mango pickle on the side. My son used to love this. He used to say, "Ma, nobody makes breakfast like you do." But that day, when I called out, "Breakfast is ready," the only reply I got was the sound of the television from their room. I stood there for a few seconds, holding the plate. My hands were trembling slightly. I walked to their room slowly, quietly. The door was half open. I saw her, my daughter-in-law, sitting on the edge of the bed. She was scrolling on her phone, her face serious. My son was getting ready for work. I smiled softly and said, "Beta, come eat before it gets cold." She didn't look up. But she spoke. Her words were sharp, almost casual. "We already ordered food," she said. My smile froze. I looked at my son. He avoided my eyes. "You ordered?" I asked softly. She shrugged. "Yeah, we wanted something different. You don't have to cook every day. It's not your job." I know she probably didn't mean to stab me with those words, but that's what it felt like. For years, feeding my family was my joy. It was the way I showed love. It wasn't a job. It was my heart. I walked back to the kitchen, sat down on the chair, and stared at the untouched plates. That was the first time I realized something was shifting in my own home. A few days later, another incident happened. I was folding clothes in the living room when I overheard them talking in the bedroom. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was just there, and their voices carried. She said, "I don't feel comfortable living like this. I want our own space." And my son replied softly, "She's my mother. I can't just ask her to leave." Her voice rose a little. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you. I want a home where I can breathe. I feel like a guest here, and I don't like it." Guest? She felt like a guest. In the house I built, I stopped folding the clothes. My hands froze midair. My heart pounded slowly, heavily. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of traffic outside. My mind kept going back to her words. I want our own space. I knew what was coming. A week later it came. We were sitting at the dinner table. My son cleared his throat. He couldn't look at me. She held his hand tightly. I saw the way he drew strength from her. "Ma," he began, his voice soft, almost shaky. "We've been thinking." I waited. My heart already knew the rest. He glanced at her and then at me. "We want to move out." For a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked at him, my son who once held my hand when he was scared of the dark. The boy who used to run to me after school, who hugged me tight and said, "Ma, I'll never leave you." I forced a smile. "That's good, Beta. Every couple needs their own space." But inside, I broke a little. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with that quiet confidence, like she had already won a battle I didn't know I was fighting. After dinner, I went to my room and closed the door. The moment I was alone, I let the tears come. No sound, just warm, silent tears rolling down my face. I held his childhood photo in my hands. The one where he's smiling, missing his front tooth. I whispered, "I hope you never forget me." The following days were like a slow storm. They started packing things, laughing together in their room, making plans. I kept quiet. I didn't want to be the bitter mother. I wanted to be the one who let go gracefully. But every sound of a suitcase closing felt like a door inside me, shutting forever. On the day they moved out, I helped them load the last box. She didn't hug me. She just said, "Take care of yourself." My son hugged me quickly, like he was in a rush. I could feel his heartbeat. It was fast, nervous. When the car drove away, I stood at the gate, watching the dust settle. The house behind me suddenly felt so much bigger and emptier. That was the day my role in his life changed, not as a mother who lived with him, but as a mother who would wait for his call. That was the turning point, the quiet betrayal that didn't need shouting, just silence. The first few days after they moved out were unbearably quiet. For more than 30 years, I'd lived in this house surrounded by voices, laughter, arguments, kitchen sounds, footsteps, my son's loud jokes. But now, all I could hear was the ceiling fan spinning slowly. I would wake up early as usual, out of habit. I'd start the tea, set 2 cups out, even though there was only me. Then I'd catch myself and quietly put 1 cup back. The silence had a weight. It pressed down on my chest like something invisible, something I couldn't name. I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned the shelves, rearranged the cupboard, washed the curtains, polished the furniture. But no matter how much I scrubbed, the emptiness wouldn't go away. Every little thing in that house reminded me of him, the little crack on the wall near the stairs. He fell there when he was 5, the dining chair with the loose leg. He wobbled it every night during dinner. The kitchen window, where he used to wave at me when he came home from school. It was like living inside a memory that wouldn't let me breathe. 2 weeks passed before I received his first call. "Ma," he said, his voice light, almost casual. "We're settled now. You should come visit sometime." I smiled into the phone, but my voice came out softer than usual. "I'm glad you're doing well, Beta," I said. "Take care of yourself." I didn't tell him how many nights I waited for that call. How many times I stared at my silent phone, convincing myself he was just busy. He didn't ask how I was doing. I didn't tell him either. Sometimes silence becomes a language between people. One afternoon, while watering the plants on the balcony, I saw the old photo album lying on the table. I opened it slowly. Page after page, his childhood stared back at me, his little hands covered in birthday cake. His first day of school, tears in his eyes. His graduation photo when he said, "Ma, one day I'll build a home for you." I touched the photos gently, as if touching his younger self. And that's when I realized something. I wasn't angry at him. I was hurt. I was invisible. I was left behind. But I wasn't angry, because the truth is, he didn't stop loving me. He just started loving someone else too. And maybe he didn't know how to balance both. One Sunday, I decided to call him. "Beta," I said softly, "I made your favorite mutton curry today. If you're free, come over." There was a pause. Then he said, "Ma, I don't know if—" And then in the background I heard her voice. "Clear. Tell her we'll come next time." I held the phone tightly. "That's okay," I said quickly, trying to sound cheerful. "Another day." I hung up before he could say anything else. That night, I sat on the balcony with a shawl around my shoulders, watching the streetlights flicker. The hurt wasn't sharp anymore. It was quiet, heavy, like a soft ache that never really goes away. But slowly I began to understand, love doesn't always stay in the same shape. Sometimes it moves, it changes, it hides behind silence. A few weeks later, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, it was him. "My son, alone." "Ma," he said softly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. He looked around the house like he was walking through an old memory. "You haven't changed anything," he whispered. I smiled faintly. "Why would I? This is still your home." He sat at the dining table, the same spot he'd sat in since he was little. And then, he said it. "I miss you, Ma." Those 4 words made the walls of my heart tremble. I didn't say anything at first. I just placed a cup of tea in front of him, the way I used to every evening. He wrapped his hands around the cup. "I know I don't call enough. I know she and you don't get along the best, but I want you to know I never stopped loving you." My throat tightened. Tears welled up, but I blinked them away. "I know, Beta," I whispered, "and I never stopped loving you either." That night, after he left, I sat quietly on the couch. No, things weren't perfect. She still didn't like me much. He still didn't visit as often as he used to. But something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting for the past to return. Instead, I started learning to live with the present. I began taking small steps, joining a nearby women's group, going on evening walks, watering the plants slowly every morning with soft music playing in the background. The house didn't feel as big anymore. It still felt quiet, but not empty, because I was no longer just waiting. I was living. Sometimes, love changes its address, but it never really disappears. It just learns to speak more softly. The sun rose gently that morning, the way it always did, slow and warm, spreading soft light across the balcony. I stood there with a shawl around my shoulders, holding my cup of tea, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own home. The house hadn't changed. The walls were the same. The kitchen still smelled of cardamom and ginger. The photo frames still held the same faces, but something inside me had changed. For months, I had carried my hurt like a heavy stone, believing I had lost my son completely. Believing that everything I built, this house, this family, this love, had turned its back on me. But life, I've learned, isn't made of one moment. It's made of many small ones, some that break you, and others that quietly stitch you back together. A few days after his visit, my son began calling more often. Just small conversations. "Ma, did you eat? Ma, how's the garden? Ma, I saw your favorite sweets today." Simple words, but they filled the empty corners of my heart like sunlight through an old window. I didn't push him. I didn't remind him of the pain. I just listened. I answered softly. I let time do its quiet work, and slowly I began to rebuild my place in his world, not through demands or tears, but through quiet love. One evening he came again. This time she came with him, my daughter-in-law. She stood at the door, a little awkward, holding a small box of sweets. I smiled. Not because everything was suddenly forgiven or forgotten, but because I decided that bitterness wouldn't be my story's ending. "Come in," I said gently. She stepped inside. We sat in the living room, not saying much at first. I poured tea for everyone. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was new, fragile, but peaceful. She didn't say sorry. I didn't ask for it. But when she placed the sweets on the table and said softly, "I thought you might like these," something loosened in the space between us. Sometimes, healing doesn't arrive with big apologies. Sometimes it comes in quiet gestures. A cup of tea, a box of sweets, a shared silence that doesn't hurt anymore. After they left, I sat in the same living room where months earlier I had cried in silence. And I smiled. Not the forced smile I wore when they packed their bags, but a real one, a soft, tired, honest smile, because I finally understood. This was still my story, and pain wasn't the ending. In the days that followed, I started embracing my own life again. I went for morning walks, waved at neighbors, joined a small women's group at the community center. I started reading again, the books I had once loved. I even began cooking for myself, not out of habit, but out of love for me. The house still held memories of my son, of my late husband, of the little boy who used to call out, "Ma!" at the door. But those memories no longer hurt. They simply belonged here, just like I did. One evening, as the sun was setting, I sat on the balcony with my cup of tea. A gentle breeze passed through. The world felt quiet but alive, and I whispered to myself, I built this house. I raised this family. I gave my love. That will always be enough. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from a soft, peaceful gratitude. Life had broken me in its own way. But it had also shown me how to stand again. We can't always control how others love us. We can't always stop people from drifting away, but we can choose how we love ourselves and how gently we hold the past. My son may have been pulled away for a while, but love has a quiet way of finding its path back home. And even if it hadn't, I had learned to build my own warmth again. Because in the end, the house I built wasn't just made of bricks and walls. It was built with memories, love and strength, and no one can take that away from me. Sometimes, the greatest strength isn't in holding on tightly, but in learning to let go softly and trust that love, in some form, always finds its way back.